If you're a complete layman and not an architectural specialist, what's so hot about Frank Gehry? What's all the fuss about?
Some of my colleagues, they think of architecture in a hermetic way. If you do this with it, it ain't architecture anymore.
He asked me to make a documentary about him. It's not just that I didn't know anything about making documentaries. I didn't even know anything about architecture.
You know, there's one good thing about my being dumb about architecture and dumb about documentaries, and that is that I ask the questions that people who don't know anything about architecture ask. I don't know anything about architecture, so I ask questions that a layman would ask. I mean, Frank was very smart in a way because Frank would say to me, I mean, he didn't actually say, please do this film, but he would say, have you ever thought about doing a documentary? I'd say, no, I don't know anything about documentaries. Have you ever thought about, no, I don't know anything about architecture, Frank. I don't want to do any movie about architects because I don't know anything about it. And in fact, when I first used to see his buildings, I always wanted to say, why didn't you finish the building? It's not finished, Frank. The building is unfinished because he had this crazy way of designing buildings. I didn't understand anything about architecture. But Frank kept saying, that's why I want you to do this, because I don't want somebody who's such an expert on architecture. I would say that the only way you can transmit or convey or whatever you communicate, whatever word you want, is don't talk to experts. Because the experts already know what you're talking about. It's the other people you're trying to reach. And people don't understand architecture. They just use it. It's something to be used. You have to reach stupid people who don't know. And I say stupid, I'm including myself. I don't mean, you know, that everybody's dumb, but I mean people who are stupid about architecture. So the one good thing I can say about my little film about Frank is I asked dumb questions. And people were interested because they don't know. You know, I ask a question, how come, where do you get an idea like this? You know, where does it come from? How do you feel when you get this idea? Are you afraid? Do you think people will think you're silly? What do you think when a critic writes a bad thing about you? Does it make you feel bad? And so on and so on and so on. You know, I mean, you have to talk to plain people who are not sophisticated. So, I mean, architecture is we can't live without it. It's essential, like food. But people don't get it because you take it for granted, because it's everywhere. It's everywhere around you all the time. Frank doesn't know anything about a computer, but he has a computer guy to help him with the design work. Frank has often said to me that if the computer existed 2,000 years ago, he wouldn't exist, Frank, because the Romans would have been using it in some way, because they were limited to squares and circles and triangles. That's all we had. You could either make a circle or a square or a rectangle or a triangle with a pyramid, make a pointed roof and a square building. But as soon as you start with these curves, it gets very messy when you have to use geometry to draw the plans. And if you look at Vitra, his furniture museum in Val am Rhein, you see the curved staircase. It doesn't meet. It goes like this. It's wrong because they couldn't read the blueprints. You couldn't translate this circular staircase against this rectangular building. But once he found the computer, because the computer that he used is from the French aircraft company Dassault Mirage, Falcon jet. That computer designs airplanes. Airplanes are all curves. Airplanes are dictated by what the outside shape has to be to fly. The wings have to be able to lift the plane. But the wings have to be used to carry fuel and wires and a lot of things. The wings are totally irregular shapes. You can't see what the useful space inside the wing is, but the computer can. So he began to make use of this computer and found these extraordinary, shapes, but very, very dependent on light. The thing about Bilbao or the Disney Concert Hall or the Marquis de Riscal winery and all of these buildings is they're different every hour and they're different every day, depending on the light. And what he designs, what he does is he takes bits of different metal and different wood and he sets them outside for a month. And he just looks at them in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, on a rainy day, on a sunny day, on a cloudy day, on a hot day, and he watches what happens. That's how he found the titanium for Bilbao. I think there are many similarities between cinema and architecture. Yes, of course, light is a primary thing. You can't have cinema without light, and you can't really appreciate architecture without light. And Frank Gehry is quite special in terms of the way he uses light, the way he designs buildings that make terrific use of light. These metallic surfaces that finish the buildings, and the curves and the complex shapes make terrific use of light. The sort of sad difference between cinema and architecture is that architecture uses peripheral vision. When you look at a building or a shape, part of your appreciation of the shape comes from what you see, but a context where you see on the edges, you're aware of the building next to it. When you take a picture of something, you have no peripheral vision. You cannot see outside the frame. And it's because you need 3 dimensions for peripheral vision and only 2 dimensions for photograph. So my problem in trying to capture the architecture of Frank Gehry was to try to find a way in 2 dimensions of showing an audience what these incredibly 3-dimensional shapes looked like. But I think there are many similarities, not the least of which is the fact that they are both disciplines that are made up of many other disciplines. Frank has to understand structural engineering, light, how do you put the stairs in, what are the acoustics for the sound. So there are a lot of specialists that you work with. I work with a cinematographer, a costume designer, a composer. I'm the head of the team, like a pyramid. And Frank works with a structural engineer and an acoustical engineer. If he's doing the Disney Concert Hall, he's worrying about acoustics. He's worrying about how do you get people out, a big crowd, and all of these disciplines. I don't think so much of outdoor or indoor as much as I think of space in general. That is, the films I do are essentially character-driven films. They're films about people. I don't know how to do science fiction. I don't know how to do a lot of special effects. I'm interested in characters. But the characters exist in a world, and the specifics of that world contribute to the lives of the characters. So it doesn't necessarily matter to me. I don't prefer one to the other. I don't say I only want to do characters inside or I only want to do characters outside. I don't care about that so much, but what I do care about, like a painting, you may have a person in a painting, but you have the person standing in a field, or you have the person against the wall. The frame of the context that they're in means a lot to the characters. If I do a film like They Shoot Horses, Don't They? It's very important to me to never go outside because the characters are trapped inside a place. And the frame of the picture is a wide frame so that I can be close to two people dancing and still see where they are in space. I like, I would say, a sense of the environment, a sense of where the characters are is important to me. It's not that I prefer to do characters indoors or I prefer to do characters outdoors. I can do either one. I mean, I'm interested in both. It's more what is the story and what's happening to the characters, and in what way does the environment or the space influence. I mean, Africa was important to Out of Africa as a place. I couldn't do it in Burbank, California. It wouldn't be the same story out of Burbank. It doesn't work. I could tell the love story, but it wouldn't be the same story. It's this woman from a tiny country, a tiny snowy country, Denmark, going to this place where there's unlimited space. So the space there meant something. It meant something. So you could make the characters very small in the landscape of Africa, and it affected them emotionally. The same is a bit true in a movie like Jeremiah Johnson, where an innocent man, a naive man, is going into these big mountains. But then, if I go to tell a story like I say, I don't know, They Shoot Horses, Don't They? The outside doesn't matter, except as an escape, as air when he opens a door or something. Or if I do Tootsie, it's about New York and the theater, and I don't need a desert, I don't need mountains, I don't need that to tell the story. In some movies, the city is important. The sense of urbanization is important. In some movies, it's quite the opposite. In Jeremiah Johnson, in The Electric Horseman, in The Scalp Hunters, in a lot of films, it's running away from the city. It's trying to go where there is no society, where you are not obliged to live by other people's needs, where you want to remain your own individual. In Out of Africa, those characters go to a country to run away from their own urban cities, London and Denmark, London and Copenhagen, but because they want to leave places where there is a great demand to conform to society's needs. They run to open spaces where they think they won't have to behave in a way that other people need. Jeremiah Johnson leaves the city and goes up into the mountains so he doesn't have to deal with civilization as he knows about it. The guy in The Electric Horseman, watches big business and urban powers brutalize this horse, and he identifies with the horse. He steals it and runs away out in the middle of the Zion National Park in the mountains where they go after him. On the other hand, The Interpreter or Tootsie or some of these other movies are all about the city, about society, about the pressures of society, the way we were, come arrivamo, or whatever. These films use the elements of urbanization in some way to tell a story, whereas some of the other films use the opposite, the space, the lack of urbanization as a force to run away from, as something that's evil. I don't know how that relates to architecture. I leave it to you.